Hey everybody, it's Roger, creator of the Azure Sandbox. Welcome back. This is the final video for the VM DevOps Extra configuration. We're just going to do a code walkthrough of this configuration just to give you a feel for some of the techniques that were used in it. So I'm just going to switch over to VS Code and let's first pull up the Bootstrap file. And I'll close my terminal here and we'll make this a bit wider. So as we mentioned, it takes a single parameter, which is your JSON configuration file. I initialize a few constants here. That's pretty straightforward. We'll skip the code walkthrough on the functions. Most of these are reused from the Azure Sandbox, and you may have seen them before. And we'll just focus on what we do in the main section here of our Bootstrap script. So we go check our PowerShell and our Azure module versions. That's the first check we do. We then go check to make sure that your environment variable with your service principal secret's been set. And then we check that we can load your JSON configuration file and that it's well formed. And then we pull in all of your variables from the configuration file in this section. So there's, some 30 odd variables that get initialized that way from your configuration file. We do a little validation against the number of instances you want to deploy, the starting instance number, the maximum instance number, and we take a look at the size of the operating system disk. We also want to check the size of the data disk to make sure that's valid. We check to see if your DSC configuration file exists. And we check to see if the script that we upload using the custom script extension exists. And at that point, we've checked everything we can check without logging into Azure and actually trying to do stuff. So here's the code where we connect up to Azure. And we then set the default subscription to the subscription that we want to use. And we validate the resource group exists that was provided. And we go and get all those secrets. So the admin username, the admin password, the domain admin username, and the domain admin password. We go get those secrets as well. And once we have those, we also need to go get the storage account key. Okay, just to make sure that that's valid. Then we go and we validate the subnet. So we just take that resource ID and split it up. And we pull out the resource group, the VNet, and the subnet names from it. And first thing we do is check to see that the VNet exists. Then we check to see if the subnet exists. Next, we upload the custom the script that we're going to use for the custom script extension up into that script's container in blob storage. So here's where we set the context, we define the file itself, and then we upload the script. And now we go in and configure Azure Automation. And in these three, we go and make sure all the modules are there and up to date that we need to compile the DSC configurations. We set a variable with our domain name. We create a credential for the domain admin. And we import the DSC configuration. And then we go into a loop and we compile a node configuration for each VM using that DSC configuration that we just imported. And we disconnect, and then we write out the terraform.tfrs file for good old Terraform. And that's pretty much it for Bootstrap. Let me see if there's anything else I highlighted in the docs. So I do go into a little bit more detail in the docs on each of the variables. Um, you know, there's a few that you should probably pay attention to, like, for example, for the data disk, if you set that to 0, there won't be any data disks provisioned. And that also you should try to adhere to the sizes for the specific types of disks that you're using. If you say, I want a 50 gig disk, well, that's going to wind up provisioning. You're going to get charged for 64 gigs worth of storage. So you might as well just say 64 gigs because you're going to pay for it anyway. Yeah, most of these variables, the documentation is pretty straightforward for them. Here's your example of your JSON config file, which we created during the Getting Started section. And then this talks through the Azure Automation DSC configuration that we do. We have to kind of configure the Azure Automation account and compile those DSC configurations so that we can register the VMs later. All right, so now we'll get in to talk a little bit about the Terraform resources that are in here. So the first thing that we look at is the VM itself. So that is here in this 020 VM DevOps win file. So a couple things I do. I create an array of virtual machine names here. And then I also calculate the URI for the script that we're going to run using the custom script extension. And this is where I decide whether there are 0 or 1 data disks, depending upon how big you said you wanted your data disk to be. And so that's the local section. Let's see if I can collapse that. Yep. So the VM section itself, we have one resource definition for all the VMs, and we, basically loop through each of the VMs, and we provision one VM for the number of instances that we decided that we wanted to provision. Nothing too fancy in here, other than you want to pay attention to this patch mode setting. If you're running Windows Client, you can either only use none or Windows Client there. You can only use platform orchestrated patching if it's Windows Server. And then this license type, if you are not going to use the hybrid use benefit, you need to set this to none. If you are going to use the hybrid use benefit, which means you own the licenses on-prem, then you can set this license type to either Windows Client or Windows Server. Here's where we provision the OS disk and we set the custom size that you provided. Okay, and here's where we set up the platform image that you want to use. In the case of what we did in the demo, we did Windows 11 Enterprise 22H2. And let's see here, we're doing the provisioner. So this is the thing that once the VM is available, Terraform then goes and registers it with Azure Automation desired state configuration, which uses this script here, aadsc register node. And that's used in other parts of the sandbox. I've walked through it before, so no need to spend more time walking through that. All right, so that's that resource. We can collapse that. Here's our NICs, pretty straightforward there. Of course, we attach them to the subnet that you provided that we validated in the Bootstrap script. And here's the data disks. Now here's the trick. If the count is 1, meaning I want a data disk, then I do the for each and I create one data disk for each of the VMs. If the count is 0, then I don't create any data disks. And it's the same thing here for the attachments. Okay. And then the last bit is the custom script extension. So, we're going to run this once for each of the VMs. And we just, pick up that script from Azure Storage and we execute it using PowerShell on the developer VM. And we send across the credentials for the storage account using in an encrypted fashion for security reasons. Yeah, so that's pretty much it on the Terraform resources. Let's have a look at the configuration script. So this is what we push through the custom script extension. So set up some constants, got some functions here. Here's the line where we resize the OS disk partition if there's any unutilized space. And here's the section where we loop through each raw disk and initialize, partition, and format it. So here's the line where we initialize each data disk that we find. Here's the line where we partition each data disk that we find. And here's the line where we format each data disk that we find. And I set the allocation unit size to, the generic 4K, which is common for, a typical NTFS partition. And then we get out. So that's that. And then this is the sample DSC configuration that I provide. So all it does is domain join the machine, and it installs Chocolatey, and it installs a couple pieces of software, VS Code and SQL Server Management Studio. And as I said, you could have many other tools that you install here: Visual Studio Enterprise, Notepad++, 7-Zip. You can install other browsers like Firefox or Chrome if your developers needed those on there. Basically anything that you can install via Chocolatey, you can install here. And I think that is it for what I cover in the documentation. Yeah. So that's it for this video series. I hope you find this extra VM DevOps configuration useful in your environment. You can either, if you need to spin up some dev VMs in the Azure Sandbox, you can use it for that. If you need to spin up some dev VMs in your own environment, you can use it for that as well. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you later.